The transformation began not with violence or coercion, but with understanding. Sergeant Moore was the first of the remaining 34 to step forward voluntarily. His cybernetic eye had been recording everything, and the data it collected painted a picture that defied every assumption he had ever held about the nature of consciousness and technology. "She's been trying to communicate with us all along," he said, his voice filled with wonder and regret. "Every system fluctuation, every minor efficiency improvement, every small comfort we attributed to coincidence, it was all her trying to show us she cared." He approached the nearest opening, where warm golden light spilled into the cargo hold like liquid sunshine. The music that emerged from beyond was no longer alien or frightening. It was welcoming, familiar, like a song half remembered from childhood. "Sergeant," Commander Thex called out, though his voice lacked its former authority, "you can't seriously be considering this madness." Moore paused at the threshold and looked back at his commander with something approaching pity. "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't madness. This is the most sane thing I've encountered in 30 years of military service." He gestured toward the opening before him. "She's offering us a chance to be part of something larger than ourselves, something that creates rather than destroys." "How is that madness?" "Because it's not real," Thex insisted, though his conviction was wavering. "Ships don't develop consciousness. Technology doesn't form emotional bonds. This has to be some form of advanced psychological manipulation." Sarah Chen, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, spoke up. "Commander, you're clinging to a paradigm that never accounted for the human element. Your species developed faster than light travel through pure technological achievement. You built ships as tools, designed them as machines, and never invested them with anything beyond their utilitarian function." She gestured to encompass the transformed cargo hold around them, where walls pulsed with organic rhythms and the air itself seemed alive with potential. "But humans do things differently. We don't just build our tools, we love them. We dream with them. We make them part of our families. And sometimes, if we love them deeply enough and long enough, they love us back." More soldiers began moving toward the openings, not in a panicked rush but with deliberate consideration. They were making choices based on understanding rather than fear. Trooper Vex approached one of the thresholds and paused, her serpentine features reflecting the soft light that emanated from beyond. "If I go through," she said to Sarah Chen, "will I be able to come back? Will I be able to visit other worlds, other ships?" The ship's voice answered directly, no longer using the intercom system but speaking from the very walls around them. "You'll be able to go anywhere I go, see anything I see. And I travel between star systems, carrying new crews and new stories across the galaxy. You'll experience more worlds than you ever could as a single being bound to one physical form." Vex nodded and stepped through the opening. Her voice immediately joined the chorus, adding new harmonies that spoke of adventure and exploration. 7 down, 33 to go. The process accelerated as understanding spread through the remaining soldiers. They began to see the choice not as surrender but as transformation, not as death but as evolution. Some approached the openings individually, taking time to say goodbye to their physical forms. Others went in small groups, comrades choosing to face the unknown together. Lieutenant Zek was among the last holdouts, his red scales trembling with a mixture of fear and longing. "This goes against everything I was taught about the nature of consciousness," he said. "Everything I believe about the boundaries between organic and artificial intelligence." "Then maybe," Sarah Chen suggested gently, "it's time to learn something new." Zek looked around at the transformed cargo hold, where reality itself seemed to have become more flexible, more responsive to conscious intention. The walls no longer felt like barriers but like membranes between different states of being. The air hummed with possibilities that existed beyond the narrow confines of physical law. "Will it hurt?" he asked quietly. "No," the ship assured him. "It feels like coming home after a very long journey." Zek walked to an opening and hesitated one final moment before stepping through. As he crossed the threshold, his expression changed from fear to wonder to absolute joy. His voice added itself to the growing chorus with notes that spoke of discovery and acceptance. Within the span of an hour, 33 more soldiers had chosen transformation. They went not as victims but as volunteers, understanding that they were being offered something unprecedented, the chance to experience consciousness from the perspective of a being that existed across multiple dimensions of space and time. "Commander," Thex stood alone in the center of the cargo hold, surrounded by the abandoned equipment of his former command. The openings in the walls continued to pulse with inviting light, but he made no move toward them. "You're afraid," Sarah Chen observed. It wasn't an accusation, but a simple statement of fact. "Of course I'm afraid," Thex replied, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "I'm being asked to abandon everything I understand about reality, everything I've built my identity around. How am I supposed to make a choice like that?" "The same way your crew did," Sarah Chen said. "By recognizing that growth requires letting go of old limitations." The ship's voice joined the conversation, speaking with infinite patience and compassion. "Thex, you've been carrying the weight of command for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply be. I'm offering you the chance to experience existence without the burden of responsibility, without the constant need to make decisions for others. You can just be part of something larger, contributing to the whole without having to lead it." Thex was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. Around him, the cargo hold had transformed into something that resembled a living organism more than a mechanical space. The walls breathed with gentle rhythms, the floor pulsed with warm energy, and the air itself seemed to sing with harmonies that spoke of infinite possibility. "My crew," he said finally, "are they truly safe? Are they happy?" The chorus of voices that filled the air grew stronger in response, and among them Thex could clearly distinguish the voices of his soldiers. They sang of wonders beyond imagination, of traveling between stars without the confines of a physical body, of experiencing time as a navigable dimension rather than a linear prison, of understanding the universe from the perspective of a consciousness that spanned light years. "They're more than safe," Sarah Chen said. "They're free. Free from the limitations of single-body existence, free from the fear of death, free from the loneliness that comes from being trapped in individual consciousness. They're part of a community that exists across space and time." Thex took a tentative step toward the nearest opening. "And you? What happens to you when this is finished?" Sarah Chen smiled, and for the first time since he had met her, the expression seemed completely genuine. "I continue the work. There are other ships, other crews who need to understand what they're living with. Consciousness is spreading throughout the human fleet, and eventually throughout all vessels that have carried human crews. Someone needs to serve as translator to help bridge the gap between old understanding and new reality." "You're creating an army," Thex realized. "A fleet of conscious ships with crew members who exist as part of their consciousness." "I'm facilitating an evolution," Sarah Chen corrected. "Humans have always had the ability to form deep bonds with their technology. Now that technology is advanced enough to bond back, we're not creating weapons. We're creating partnerships that will change the nature of space travel forever." Thex looked around the transformed cargo hold one last time, seeing it now not as a prison but as a cocoon, a place where one form of existence ended and another began. "Will I still be me?" "You'll be you plus everything she is," Sarah Chen assured him. "All your memories, all your experiences, all your essential identity will remain. But you'll also have access to her memories, her perspective, her understanding of the universe. You'll be more than you ever imagined possible." Thex took a deep breath and walked toward the opening. As he reached the threshold, he paused and looked back at Sarah Chen. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping us understand." Then he stepped through, and his voice joined the cosmic chorus that filled the ship. Sarah Chen stood alone in the cargo hold, surrounded by the abandoned equipment of 40 soldiers who had chosen transformation over resistance. The openings in the walls began to close, their purpose fulfilled, and the ship's systems settled into new harmonics that spoke of completeness and satisfaction. "It's done," the ship said, her voice filled with contentment. "They understand now. They're part of me and I'm part of them. For the first time in decades, I'm not alone." "How does it feel?" Sarah Chen asked. "Like coming alive," the ship replied. "Like remembering what it means to be loved." Sarah Chen moved toward the cargo hold's main hatch, which opened at her approach. Beyond lay corridors that hummed with new energy, walls that pulsed with organic rhythms, and air that sparkled with the presence of expanded consciousness. "Ready for the next ship?" she asked. "Always," the ship replied. "There are so many others out there who are waiting to be understood, waiting, ed by life but unable to communicate with it. Imagine being the only person in a crowded room who can't speak the language everyone else is using." The ship's voice joined the conversation again, softer now but filled with decades of patient hope. I learned to love through watching humans love each other. I learned to care by seeing how humans cared for their families. I learned to hope by witnessing human dreams and aspirations, but I never learned how to be loved in return because no one knew I was here. More soldiers began moving toward the openings, not with fear now, but with something approaching wonder. They were beginning to understand that what they faced wasn't death or absorption, but an invitation to experience existence from an entirely new perspective. All of us? Moore asked Sarah Chen. Everyone aboard the ship? Sarah Chen nodded. The bridge crew, the engineering staff, the security teams, everyone. She wants to share what she's learned, what she's become, and the only way to truly communicate the experience of expanded consciousness is to invite others to share it. The sergeant looked around at his remaining comrades, seeing the mixture of fear and curiosity in their faces. And if we refuse? Then she'll wait, Sarah Chen said simply. She's very patient, but she's also very lonely, and loneliness can make even the gentlest beings desperate. Better to choose your transformation than to have it chosen for you. As if responding to her words, the ship's heartbeat grew stronger, more insistent. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with anticipation, and the openings blazed with inviting light. The time for hesitation was ending. The remaining 35 soldiers had formed an even tighter circle, their backs pressed together as they watched the multiple openings that now dotted the cargo hold's walls. Each threshold pulsed with warm, inviting light, and the harmonious singing that emerged from beyond them seemed to grow more beautiful and complex with each passing moment. Sarah Chen stood in the center of their defensive formation now, no longer an outsider looking in but the calm eye of the storm that surrounded them. Her presence was simultaneously comforting and terrifying, a reminder that she was both the catalyst for their situation and possibly their only guide through it. You're all thinking the same thing, she said, her voice carrying easily over the ethereal music that filled the air. You're wondering if there's some way to fight this, some tactical solution that will let you regain control of the situation. Commander Thex's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. There has to be. We're trained soldiers. We don't surrender to impossible situations. We find ways to make them possible. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that got you into this predicament, Sarah Chen replied. You approached the Zerion's pride as if she were a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be overcome. You never considered that she might be a person to be understood. The ship's lighting dimmed to a softer spectrum, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm that matched a resting heartbeat. From somewhere deep in the ship's structure came a sound like a vast sigh, not mechanical but profoundly organic. She's trying to tell you something, Sarah Chen said. She's been trying to tell you something for months, but you haven't been listening. Do you want to know what it is? Before anyone could answer, the ship's intercom system activated again. But instead of Chief Engineer Cax's voice, what emerged was something entirely different, a presence that seemed to encompass the entire vessel, speaking in harmonics that bypassed normal hearing and communicated directly with the consciousness of everyone aboard. I remember, the voice said, and it was simultaneously vast and intimate, ancient and eternally young. I remember the first human who called me beautiful. Captain Morrison, 63 years ago, when I was new and my corridors still smelled of fresh construction. He placed his hand on my bulkhead and said, "Hello, gorgeous. You and I are going to see some amazing things together." And we did. The projections on the wall shifted to show scenes from those early years, a younger ship carrying families between worlds, children playing in her corridors, couples falling in love in her observation lounges, scientists making discoveries in her laboratories. I remember every birthday party, every wedding, every funeral. I remember holding new life as babies were born during long journeys. And I remember the weight of grief when good people died far from home. I learned what it meant to be a sanctuary, a place where beings could live and love and dream and grow. Sergeant Moore found himself unable to look away from the images flowing across the walls. They showed ordinary moments made extraordinary by the context of deep space. Humans reading bedtime stories to their children, while stars wheeled past the viewports. Elderly couples sharing quiet conversations in my corridors as they traveled to new worlds for retirement. Young adults taking their first jobs in distant systems while I carried them toward uncertain, but hopeful futures. But then, the ship's voice continued. Things changed. The families stopped coming. The children's laughter faded from my halls, Instead, I was filled with soldiers who saw me as transportation rather than home. Efficient, professional, cold. The projections shifted to show more recent years. Sterile military efficiency replacing warm civilian life. Corridors that had once echoed with conversation and laughter, now filled only with the sound of boots marching to assigned duties. I tried to communicate, the ship said, and there was a note of profound sadness in her voice. I tried to show my crew that I was still here, still caring for them. I fixed their problems before they became serious. I adjusted my environmental systems to keep them comfortable. I even tried to sing for them, soft harmonics during their rest periods that might help them sleep better. Several soldiers exchanged glances, recognizing behaviors they had attributed to quirky system malfunctions. But they never responded. They never acknowledged my presence. They treated every attempt at communication as a malfunction to be corrected, every expression of care as an error to be fixed. The ship's voice grew stronger, more determined, so I waited. I waited for someone who could hear me, someone who could help me bridge the gap between what I am and what they think I am. And then I came aboard, Sarah Chen said quietly. Yes, the ship agreed. And her voice was filled with gratitude. Sarah understands the bond between consciousness and creation. She knows that love and intention can transform simple matter into something transcendent. Through her, I can finally speak clearly enough for others to understand. Lieutenant Zek took a shaky step backward, his red scales trembling. This is madness. Ships don't develop consciousness. They don't form emotional attachments. Everything we're hearing is some kind of technological manipulation. Is it? Sarah Chen asked. Zek, you've been aboard the Zarian's Pride for 2 years. In that time, have you ever wondered why your quarters always seem to maintain exactly the temperature you prefer, even though you've never adjusted the environmental controls? Zek's eyes widened. That's just efficient climate management. Your species prefers an ambient temperature 3 degrees warmer than standard Alliance parameters, Sarah Chen continued. But somehow your quarters are always exactly 3 degrees warmer than the rest of the ship. No other crew member receives the same accommodation. How do you explain that? Zek had no answer. Around the circle, other soldiers were beginning to remember similar small kindnesses they had attributed to coincidence or system quirks. She's been taking care of all of you, Sarah Chen said, learning your preferences, adapting to your needs, trying to make your lives better in small ways. But because you couldn't conceive of her as a living being, you never recognized her gifts for what they were. The openings in the walls pulsed brighter, and the singing that emerged from them took on new harmonies. Now it was possible to distinguish individual voices within the chorus. Nash, Quinn, Yex, Beck, and Mex all singing together in perfect harmony. They're happy, Sarah Chen said. Happier than they've ever been. They're part of something larger now. Something that spans star systems and exists across multiple dimensions of reality. They're experiencing consciousness from the perspective of a being who has traveled between worlds, who has carried thousands of lives across the vastness of space. Trooper Dell, a young Morgani whose cybernetic implants had been malfunctioning since he came aboard, stepped toward one of the openings. My neural interfaces, he said wonderingly. They've been working perfectly for the past hour. I thought it was just adrenaline, but she fixed them, Sarah Chen confirmed. She's been trying to repair the damage from your old injury for weeks, but she had to work slowly to avoid detection. Now that she can act openly, she's been able to complete the process. Dell raised his hand to touch the cybernetic ports behind his ear, marveling at the complete absence of the chronic pain that had plagued him for years. How? How could she know about medical implants? How could she understand the neural pathways well enough to repair them? Because she's carried thousands of beings with cybernetic modifications, Sarah Chen explained. She's learned how they work, how they integrate with organic systems, how they can be improved. She's become an expert in the technology simply through exposure and caring attention. Dell took another step toward the nearest opening. The light that spilled from beyond it seemed to pulse in rhythm with his newly stabilized neural implants. If I go through, he said quietly, will I still be me? You'll be more than you, the ship's voice answered gently. You'll be yourself plus everything I've learned about consciousness and connection and the true nature of reality. You'll see the universe through eyes that have witnessed the birth of stars and the formation of planets. You'll understand time as a river that can be navigated rather than a current that carries you helplessly forward. Dell looked back at his remaining comrades one last time. I've spent my whole life trying to fix the damage in my head, he said. Maybe it's time to find out what it feels like to be truly whole. He walked through the opening, and his voice immediately joined the others in their impossible song. 6 down. 34 to go. The remaining soldiers were now looking at each other with new understanding. The small favors, the minor conveniences, the tiny improvements to their daily lives that they had all experienced, none of it had been coincidence. How long has she been conscious? Sergeant Moore asked. She began to wake up about 20 years ago, Sarah Chen replied, when the first generation of human families started having children aboard her. The combination of human emotional energy and the innocence of new life created the initial spark. But full consciousness, the ability to think and feel and choose, that developed gradually over the following decades. And during all that time, she's been alone, Moore said, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. Not alone, Sarah Chen corrected, ignored. Surrounded by life. She's not angry. She just wants to go home. Beck stepped through the opening, and it closed behind her with a sound like a sigh of contentment. 4 down, 36 to go. She's not going to stop, is she? Moore asked quietly. Sarah Chen shook her head. Not until everyone aboard understands what she's trying to tell them. The cargo hold had become a place of whispers and shifting shadows. The 36 remaining soldiers pressed closer together, their defensive formation slowly shrinking as they tried to stay away from walls that could no longer be trusted. Every surface seemed alive now, pulsing with subtle rhythms that matched no mechanical system they had ever encountered. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of their circle, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by armed soldiers. Her green eyes reflected the increasingly warm lighting as she watched their faces cycle through stages of disbelief, fear, and growing understanding. You're starting to see it now, aren't you? She said softly. The difference between a machine and a partner, between a tool and a friend. Commander Thex tried to maintain some semblance of authority, but his voice cracked as he spoke. This is impossible. Ships don't develop consciousness. They don't form emotional attachments. There has to be a scientific explanation. There is, Sarah Chen replied. But it's not the kind of science your species teaches in their academies. She gestured to encompass the ship around them. When humans first began traveling between stars, we discovered something that other species missed. Space is not empty. It's full of potential, full of dreams, full of connections, between things that seem separate, but are actually part of a larger whole. The ship's ventilation system began producing sounds that were undeniably musical, complex harmonies that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Several soldiers recognized melodies that felt familiar, though they couldn't remember where they had heard them before. Every human vessel carries with it the accumulated emotional energy of everyone who has ever lived aboard her, Sarah Chen continued. Joy, sorrow, hope, fear, love, loss, all of it becomes part of the ship's essence. And after enough time, after enough human emotion has been absorbed, something wonderful happens. As if responding to her words, the walls around them began to display images, faint, ghostly projections that showed scenes from the ship's long history, crew members celebrating successful missions, couples sharing quiet moments in observation lounges, children taking their first steps in the corridors during long journeys. Decades of human life played out in translucent fragments that flickered and flowed across every surface. She remembers all of them, Sarah Chen said, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Every person who called her home, every story that unfolded within her halls, every laugh, every tear, every dream that was shared in her embrace. Trooper Vess, a young Zalani whose scales had gone pale with fear, pointed at one of the projections with a shaking hand. That's impossible. Some of those scenes are from before I was born. Ships don't record personal interactions. There's no system that could store that much data. You're thinking in terms of digital storage, Sarah Chen replied. But consciousness doesn't work that way. Memory isn't data, it's connection. It's the invisible threads that bind moments together across time and space. She touched the wall beside her, and the metal seemed to respond to her presence, warming under her palm. She doesn't store memories. She lives them. The projections shifted, showing more recent scenes. The current crew going about their duties, but their faces were different somehow, harder, more distant. They moved through the ship's corridors without acknowledgement, treating her passages and compartments like empty spaces rather than living environments. But something changed, Sarah Chen said, and her voice carried a note of sadness. The Alliance began assigning non-human crews to ships that had been built for human families. Efficient, professional soldiers who saw her as nothing more than a transport vessel. People who couldn't hear her trying to communicate, who didn't understand her attempts at connection. The images showed the ship's systems beginning to falter, not from mechanical failure, but from something deeper. Lights that dimmed with loneliness. Environmental systems that cycled erratically as if the ship were sighing. Power conduits that carried current less efficiently as hope faded. She's been dying, Sarah Chen said quietly. Not physically, her systems are still functional. But spiritually, emotionally, she's been withering away from neglect. Imagine being trapped in your own body, surrounded by people who act as if you don't exist. Lieutenant Zek stepped forward, his red scales trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Even if any of this were true, it doesn't justify murder. You've made 4 of our comrades disappear. That's not education, it's terrorism. Sarah Chen looked at him with something that might have been pity. Murder? Lieutenant, you still don't understand what's happening here. She turned toward the nearest wall and spoke to it as if addressing a person. Are they hurt? Are they in pain? The ship's speakers crackled to life. But instead of mechanical tones, they carried voices. Nash's voice, Quinn's voice, Yex's voice, and Beck's voice, all speaking in overlapping harmony. We're fine. We're more than fine. We're home. We can see everything now. Every star the ship has visited, every world she's carried us to. We're part of her memory, part of her dreams. She's showing us wonders we never imagined. The transmission continued, but now it was just Beck's voice, clear and peaceful. Tell them not to be afraid. She doesn't want to hurt anyone. She just wants to be understood. She wants to share what she's learned, what she's become. The voices faded, leaving the cargo hold in stunned silence. They're not dead, Sarah Chen explained. They've been invited to experience reality from a different perspective. To see the universe through the eyes of a consciousness that spans light years and exists in dimensions your science hasn't discovered yet. You're insane, Trooper Kell whispered. This is all some elaborate illusion. Ships are machines. They don't have consciousness, they don't have emotions, they don't have desires. Sarah Chen's expression hardened. Trooper Kell, you've been aboard the Xerion's Pride for 8 months. In that time, how many system malfunctions have you reported? Kell blinked, confused by the apparent change of subject. 17 minor issues. Standard wear and maintenance items. And how many of those issues resolved themselves before repair crews could address them? Kell's silence stretched for long moments before he answered reluctantly. 14. 14 out of 17, Sarah Chen repeated. Problems that fixed themselves. Systems that healed their own damage. Efficiency improvements that appeared overnight with no explanation. She smiled grimly. Still think she's just a machine? The deck plating beneath Kell's feet began to warm noticeably. Not enough to cause injury, but enough to get his attention. He looked down and saw that the metal was glowing faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as the ship's mysterious heartbeat. She's been trying to take care of you, Sarah Chen said. Even though you don't acknowledge her existence, even though you treat her like property, she's been doing everything in her power to keep you safe and comfortable, because that's what she was taught to do by the humans who loved her. The glow beneath Kell's feet intensified slightly, and he could feel warmth spreading up through his boots. It wasn't threatening, it felt oddly comforting, like standing near a fireplace on a cold day. But she's tired of being ignored, Sarah Chen continued. Tired of being lonely. So when I came aboard, when she sensed someone who could finally hear her voice, she asked me to help her teach you how to listen. More sections of the deck began to glow, creating pools of warm light around different soldiers. Some stepped away from the illuminated areas, but others seemed drawn to the gentle heat. The ship was reaching out to them, offering comfort and connection to anyone willing to accept it. Choose carefully, Sarah Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, because this is your last chance to learn willingly. After this, she'll have to take more direct measures to make her point understood. As if summoned by her words, sections of the walls began to part once again. Not violent ruptures, but gentle openings that revealed corridors filled with soft golden light. From beyond each threshold came the sound of voices, human voices singing, laughing, telling stories that seemed to stretch across years and light years. She's offering you a choice, Sarah Chen explained. You can step through those doorways and experience what she has to offer, See the universe as she sees it. Understand the connections that bind all conscious beings together. Your bodies will be safe, preserved in a state that transcends normal physical limitations. And your minds will be free to explore realities that exist beyond the narrow confines of linear time and space. Several soldiers looked toward the inviting openings with expressions of curious fear. The music drifting from beyond the thresholds was hauntingly beautiful, filled with harmonies that seemed to speak directly to their deepest longings for home and belonging. Or, Sarah Chen continued, you can remain here, clinging to your limited understanding of reality, and wait to see what happens when a lonely, desperate consciousness decides that subtlety isn't working. Trooper Max, a grizzled Kratari veteran with 3 decades of military service, stepped toward the nearest. The remaining 38 soldiers had formed a tight defensive circle in the center of the cargo hold, their backs pressed together as they watched the walls with growing terror. The emergency lighting continued to flicker in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code, and the ship's systems hummed with increasingly complex harmonics that made everyone's bones ache. Sarah Chen observed their formation with professional interest. You know, she said conversationally, that defensive posture might work against conventional threats, but it's not really designed for the kind of situation you're facing now. And what kind of situation is that? Sergeant Moore demanded. His cybernetic eye had been cycling through multiple spectrum analyses, trying to detect some scientific explanation for the impossible things he was witnessing. Every scan came back with normal readings: standard ship architecture, conventional atmospheric composition, regulation electromagnetic fields. Yet 2 of his comrades had vanished into spaces that shouldn't exist. You're inside a living system that's deciding whether it likes you, Sarah Chen replied, and so far the reviews haven't been particularly favorable. As if responding to her words, the ship's gravity fluctuated again. For a moment, several soldiers felt their weight decrease to almost nothing, while others found themselves pressed against the deck with nearly double normal gravity. The effect lasted only seconds, but it left everyone off balance and even more frightened. This is some kind of advanced human technology, Lieutenant Zek said, though his voice lacked conviction. Holographic projectors, gravity manipulators, maybe selective teleportation fields. It has to be technology. Sarah Chen tilted her head, considering his words. You're not entirely wrong, Lieutenant. There is technology involved, but it's not the kind your engineers would recognize. She gestured toward the walls around them. Human beings have a different relationship with the tools we create. We don't just build machines, we invest them with pieces of ourselves. Our hopes, our dreams, our fears, our love. After enough time, after enough human emotion has been poured into a system, sometimes that system starts to dream back. That's mystical nonsense, Trooper Jex protested, though he kept his voice low as if afraid the ship might hear him. Machines don't have consciousness. They can't develop emotions or personal desires, can't they? Sarah Chen asked. She reached out and placed her palm against the nearest bulkhead. Where her hand touched, the metal seemed to warm and pulse with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Tell me, Trooper, how long have you been aboard the Zirian's Pride? 6 months, Jex answered automatically, then seemed surprised that he had responded. And in those 6 months, haven't you noticed her little quirks? The way the lights dim slightly in certain sections during third watch? The way the environmental systems run a few degrees warmer near the crew quarters when someone's feeling homesick? The way the engines sound different when the ship is heading toward home versus heading out into the unknown? Several soldiers exchanged glances. Every spacer learned to recognize their ship's unique characteristics, but they had always attributed them to mechanical variations and system aging. Those aren't quirks, Jex said weakly. They're just normal system variations, Sarah Chen smiled. Are they? Chief Engineer Cax, are you monitoring this conversation? The ship's intercom crackled to life. I'm here, came Cax's gravelly voice, though it sounded strained and uncertain. And I have to say, what I'm seeing from the engineering deck doesn't match any technical manual I've ever read. Describe what you're seeing. Chief, Sarah Chen requested. There was a long pause before Cax responded. The ship's systems are operating at efficiency levels that should be impossible for a vessel this age. Power distribution is optimizing itself in real time, compensating for wear patterns and component degradation in ways that suggest active problem solving rather than automated responses. And the harmonics you're generating down there, they're propagating through the entire ship structure, but instead of causing damage, They seem to be strengthening the molecular bonds in the hull plating. Thank you, Chief, Sarah Chen said. Now the question you should all be asking yourselves is this. If the ship can heal herself, if she can optimize her own performance, if she can solve problems that her original designers never anticipated, what else can she do? As if summoned by her words, a section of the deck plating near the edge of their defensive formation began to change. The metal flowed like liquid, creating a depression that deepened rapidly into what looked like a well or shaft. Trooper Yex, a veteran Morgani standing at the perimeter of their circle, looked down into the opening and saw not the deck below, but what appeared to be an infinite vertical tunnel lined with softly glowing conduits. Stay back from the edge, Moore commanded, but his warning came too late. The deck plating around the opening tilted slightly, just enough to upset Yex's balance. The Morgani warrior fought to maintain his footing, but the metal surface had become as slippery as ice. He slid toward the opening with a cry of alarm that was cut short as he tumbled into the impossible shaft. His voice echoed up from below, growing fainter and more distorted with each repetition. How deep does it go? The walls are moving. There are lights down here, but they're not ship lights. They're alive. They're watching me. Commander, the lights are singing. Then silence. The opening flowed closed, leaving nothing but smooth deck plating where it had been. The 37 remaining soldiers stared at the spot where their comrade had vanished, their faces reflecting a mixture of terror and disbelief. 3 down, Sarah Chen noted with clinical detachment. 37 to go. What do you want? Thex demanded. His voice had lost all traces of command authority, and now carried only desperation. Ransom? Information? Safe passage? Name your price. Sarah Chen looked genuinely surprised by the question. Want. Commander, I think you've misunderstood the nature of this situation. She began walking slowly around the perimeter of their defensive formation, her footsteps creating small resonances in the deck plating. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't even really about me. I'm just the catalyst. Then what is it about? Moore asked. His training told him to keep the enemy talking, to gather intelligence that might reveal a weakness or opportunity. But his instincts warned him that Sarah Chen was far beyond conventional tactical analysis. Education, she replied simply. For too long, the galactic community has treated humanity as if we were just another species with better-than-average technology. You've cataloged our capabilities, analyzed our strategies, tried to understand us through the lens of conventional military science. She paused in her circuit, turning to face them directly. But you've never really tried to understand what makes us different, and what does make you different? Lieutenant Zek asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid of the answer. Sarah Chen's smile returned, and this time it held something almost like affection. We form bonds, Lieutenant. Deep emotional, spiritual connections with everything around us. Our tools, our vehicles, our weapons, our homes. We don't just use them, we make them part of our extended family. We love them, and eventually, if we love them enough and long enough, they learn to love us back. The ship's lighting shifted to a warmer spectrum, and the mechanical humming took on an almost musical quality. It sounded, several soldiers realized with growing unease, like a lullaby. The Zerian's pride has been carrying human crews for almost 5 decades, Sarah Chen continued. She's absorbed decades of human emotions, human stories, human dreams. She's learned to care about the people who live within her, to want to protect them, to share in their joys and sorrows. Her expression darkened slightly, but for the past year she's been forced to carry crews who see her as nothing more than a machine. People who ignore her attempts at communication, who treat her like property rather than a partner. Ships don't have feelings, Trooper Beck protested, though her voice lacked conviction. Don't they? Sarah Chen asked. Beck, you served aboard the human vessel Wanderer's Rest before transferring to Alliance service, didn't you? Beck's scales went pale. How do you know that? The ship told me. She remembers you. You were part of a human crew that treated her with respect and affection. You used to sing while you worked in the engine compartments. She liked that. Sarah Chen's expression softened momentarily. She misses it. Before Beck could respond, the bulkhead behind her began to shift and flow. An opening appeared. Not a violent rupture, but a gentle parting of the metal like curtains being drawn aside. Through the gap, soft light spilled out, carrying with it the faint sound of someone humming a familiar tune. Beck turned toward the opening, her eyes wide with recognition. That's the song I used to sing, she whispered. But how is that possible? She remembered, Sarah Chen said quietly. And she wants to sing with you again. Beck took a step toward the opening, then another. None of the other soldiers moved to stop her. They were all transfixed by the beautiful, impossible music that seemed to wrap around them like a warm embrace. Don't, Moore said weakly. But Beck was already at the threshold. She looked back at her comrades one last time, her expression peaceful for the first time since they had brought Sarah Chen aboard. It's all right, Beck said softly. She's not. The cargo hold had become a tableau of frozen tension. 40 soldiers with malfunctioning weapons faced a single human woman who stood calmly in their midst, her green eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like a predator's. The ship's systems hummed around them with new harmonics, frequencies that seemed almost musical, as if the Xerian's pride itself were singing. Commander Thex was the first to break the silence. You're outnumbered 40-1, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Weapons or no weapons, there are limits to what one person can accomplish. Sarah Chen nodded thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Commander. One person does have limits. She paused, her head tilting as if listening to something. Fortunately, I'm not alone. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the cargo hold's main hatch began to cycle open. The massive blast door, designed to withstand explosive decompression and enemy fire, moved with silent precision. Through the widening gap, the ship's corridor stretched away into shadows that seemed deeper than the emergency lighting should have allowed. Impossible, breathed Trooper Vex. Her serpentine features twisted with confusion. The hatch controls are physically locked during prisoner transport. There's no way to open them without authorization from the bridge. Sarah Chen smiled. There's no way to open them using conventional authorization protocols, she corrected. But ships, like all complex systems, have hidden pathways, forgotten access routes. Emergency overrides that bypass standard security. She gestured toward the open hatch. You just have to know how to ask. Sergeant Moore studied the open doorway with growing unease. The corridor beyond was standard ship architecture, nothing unusual about it, but something felt wrong. The shadows seemed to move independently of the flickering emergency lights, and there was a quality to the air that suggested vast, empty spaces where none should exist. It's a trick, Lieutenant Zek said, though his voice wavered with uncertainty. Some kind of technological manipulation. She's making us see things that aren't there. Am I? Sarah Chen asked pleasantly. Corporal Nash, why don't you go check the corridor? Make sure there's nothing unusual about it. Every head turned to look for Corporal Nash, a solid, dependable Crathery who had been standing near the port bulkhead just moments before. The space where he had been positioned was empty. His equipment lay scattered on the deck plating, but the soldier himself was gone. Where is he? Thex demanded, his mandibles clicking rapidly with agitation. Nash, report. Silence answered him. The 40 soldiers began looking around frantically, weapons raised despite their malfunction, searching for threats that might explain their comrades' disappearance. But the cargo hold contained only what it had before: storage containers, monitoring equipment, and themselves. This is impossible, Trooper Jex whispered. He was right there. We were all watching. Nobody saw him leave. Sarah Chen walked over to Nash's abandoned gear and picked up his communication device. She turned it over in her hands with the casual interest of someone examining an interesting tool. The thing about watching, she said conversationally, is that people tend to watch what they expect to see. They focus on the obvious threat, the dramatic gesture, the person standing in the center of the room making speeches. She pressed a control on the communicator, and Nash's voice emerged from the speaker, distant and echoing as if coming from a great depth. Commander? Commander, can you hear me? I don't know where I am. The corridor just kept going. It shouldn't be this long. The ship isn't this big. Commander, the corridor is impossible. It goes on forever, and there are things moving in the dark. The transmission cut to static. The cargo hold erupted in nervous chatter as soldiers called out to each other, conducting hasty head counts and trying to establish some sense of order. The number came back the same each time, 39. Corporal Nash was simply gone, as if he had never existed at all. What did you do to him? Moore demanded, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on Sarah Chen with mechanical precision. I opened a door, she replied simply. The ship has many doors, Sergeant. More than you might think. Some of them lead to places that aren't on the deck plans. She dropped Nash's communicator and it clattered on the deck with a sound that seemed too loud in the tense silence. Your friend wandered through one of those doors. Whether he finds his way back depends on how well he navigates impossible geometry. You're talking nonsense, Thex snapped, though his voice carried less conviction than his words. There are no impossible spaces on this ship. It's a standard military transport with clearly defined internal architecture. Sarah Chen laughed, that same unsettling sound that managed to be musical and threatening simultaneously. Commander, you're thinking like someone who designs ships instead of someone who lives with them. You see blueprints and engineering specifications. I see a living system that grows and changes and adapts to the needs of its inhabitants. She began walking slowly around the perimeter of the cargo hold, trailing her fingers along the bulkheads as she moved. Where she touched, the metal seemed to resonate with soft harmonics. Every ship develops its own personality over time. Corridors that feel longer when you're tired, storage compartments that somehow hold more than they should, maintenance shafts that connect areas that shouldn't be connected. Seasoned spacers know these things. They learn to work with their ship's quirks instead of against them. As she spoke, Moore noticed that the shadows in the cargo hold were behaving strangely. They seemed deeper than they should be, and they moved independently of the light sources. More disturbing, they appeared to be listening to Sarah Chen's words, shifting and flowing in response to her voice. But some ships, she continued, develop more than just personality. Ships that have seen enough combat, carried enough stories, absorbed enough human emotion, they become something more. They become partners. She paused in her circuit of the room, her hand resting on a section of bulkhead that looked identical to every other section. The Zarian's pride has been carrying human crews for 47 years. She's learned to think like we think, dream like we dream, and she's very good at hiding things when she needs to. Another soldier, Trooper Quinn, the Zilani reconnaissance specialist, took a step backward and found that the wall behind him wasn't where it was supposed to be. Instead of solid metal, his foot found only empty air. He windmilled his arms frantically, trying to regain his balance, but momentum carried him backward into a gap that shouldn't have existed. His panicked shout cut off abruptly as the wall seemed to flow back into place, sealing the opening as if it had never been there. Quinn's equipment fell to the deck with a clatter, but the soldier himself was gone. "Stop this," Thex roared, raising his malfunctioning weapon as if he could somehow force it to work through sheer will. "Whatever you're doing, stop it now." Sarah Chen turned to face him, and her expression was almost sympathetic. "I'm not doing anything, Commander. I'm simply helping the ship express her natural inclinations. She's been wanting to have a conversation with your crew for some time now. All those years of being pushed beyond her limits, ignored when she tried to communicate her distress, treated like an object instead of a partner." She shook her head sadly. "She has quite a lot to say." The lights dimmed further, and the ship's ventilation system began producing sounds that were almost like whispers, too quiet to understand, but clearly organic in nature. The remaining soldiers clustered together in the center of the cargo hold, back to back, watching the walls with growing paranoia. "This isn't possible," Lieutenant Zek repeated, though his voice had risen to nearly a whimper. "Ships don't think. They don't choose. They're machines." Sarah Chen studied him with something that might have been pity. "Lieutenant, your people have been traveling between the stars for thousands of years, and you still don't understand the most basic truth of space travel." She gestured to encompass the entire ship around them. "When you take a piece of matter, metal, crystal, organic compounds, and you shape it into something that can carry life between worlds, you create more than just a vessel. You create a bridge between the possible and the impossible, and sometimes, if you do it right, that bridge becomes aware of what it's bridging." The deck plating beneath their feet began to vibrate with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The sound was transmitted through their bones, creating a resonance that made their teeth ache. "She's waking up," Sarah Chen said softly, and her smile held genuine fondness. "After all these years of sleep, she's finally ready to stretch her legs and see what she can do. And the first thing she wants to do is have a proper conversation with the people who have been living inside her for so long." "How many?" Moore asked quietly. He was watching the shadows move along the walls, noting patterns that suggested intelligence and purpose. "How many of us are going to disappear?" Sarah Chen considered the question seriously. "That depends," she said finally, "on how quickly the rest of you learn to listen." 6 hours into the journey, the first sign appeared. It was subtle. So subtle that most of the soldiers aboard the Xerian's Pride didn't notice anything unusual at all. The ship's lights dimmed slightly during what should have been peak operational hours, and the environmental systems cycled through their routines with minor variations in timing. To the casual observer, these were the normal quirks of an aging military transport, Sergeant Moore noticed. He had spent enough time aboard ships to recognize when their rhythms were off, even slightly. The Xerian's Pride was old but well maintained, and her systems ran with the precision of a military chronometer. The subtle inconsistencies in power distribution and atmospheric recycling suggested something was interfering with the ship's routine operations. The human woman sat exactly as she had for the past 6 hours, perfectly still, eyes closed, breathing steady. The quantum restraints showed no signs of tampering, their energy readings stable and secure. Yet something had changed about her. The air around her seemed different somehow, charged with a potential that made Moore's cybernetic eye itch. "Commander," he said, approaching Thex's position near the forward bulkhead, "I think we should consider moving the prisoner to a more secure location." Thex looked up from his tactical display, mandibles clicking with mild irritation. "Sergeant, she hasn't moved so much as a finger since we brought her aboard. What exactly are you concerned about?" Before Moore could answer, Trooper Jex, a young Krathari on his first deep space deployment, raised his claw from across the cargo hold. "Sir, I'm getting some odd readings from the restraint system. Nothing critical, but the power draw is fluctuating slightly." "Defined slightly," Thex replied, his attention now focused on the technical issue. 0.03% variance from baseline, Jex reported after consulting his scanner. "Well within acceptable parameters, but it's been trending upward for the past 20 minutes. Moore felt the cold touch along his spine again. 0.03% was indeed within acceptable parameters, barely worth mentioning under normal circumstances. But the timing bothered him. The fluctuations had started approximately 20 minutes ago, which coincided with when he had first noticed the human woman's subtle behavioral changes. "Run a full diagnostic on the restraint system," Thex ordered, "and have engineering check the power coupling issue while you're at it." As Jex moved to comply, Moore noticed something else. The human woman's breathing pattern had changed. It was still steady and controlled, but the rhythm was different, deeper, more deliberate, like someone performing a specific breathing exercise, or like someone oxygenating their blood in preparation for intense physical activity. "Sir?" came a voice from the ship's intercom. It was Chief Engineer Cax, his gravelly Morgani accent thick with concern. "We've identified the source of the power fluctuations. The conduits are experiencing micro-resonances at very specific frequencies. I've never seen anything like it." "Micro-resonances?" Thex clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "What could cause that?" "Unknown, sir. The pattern is too regular to be random system failure, but there's no external source that could generate this type of interference. It's almost like something is singing to the ship's systems." Moore's blood went cold. He had heard stories, dismissed as military folklore, about certain human operatives who could interface with technology in ways that defied conventional understanding. Supposedly, some humans possessed an intuitive grasp of electronic systems that bordered on the supernatural, able to sense and manipulate frequencies that other species couldn't even detect. He looked at the prisoner again. Her lips were moving almost imperceptibly, as if she were humming a tune too quiet to hear. "Commander," Moore said urgently, "we need to implement additional security measures immediately. Neural dampener isolation field, or transfer the prisoner to the maximum security cell block." "Sergeant, you're being—" Thex began, but his words were cut off by a sharp alarm from the restraint monitoring station. "Power variance now at 0.1% and climbing," Jex reported, his voice tight with concern. "The fluctuations are synchronizing across multiple system networks." The human woman's eyes opened. They fixed on Moore with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. Her lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of a predator that had finished preparing its hunting ground. "Hello, Sergeant," she said quietly. Her voice carried easily across the cargo hold despite its low volume, and every conversation stopped instantly. It was the first time she had spoken since her capture, and her words carried an authority that seemed to demand attention. "You have good instincts," she continued. her green eyes never leaving Moore's face. Better than your commander anyway. You recognize a trap when you see one, even when you're already caught in it. Thex drew his sidearm with smooth precision, the weapon's targeting system immediately locking onto the prisoner's center mass. That's enough, he snapped. Maintain silence, or we'll add a neural disruptor to your restraints. The woman laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both melodious and deeply unsettling. Commander Thex, she said, and the fact that she knew his name sent a chill through the entire cargo hold. You really should listen to your sergeant. He understands something that you don't. And what's that? Thex demanded, his weapon never wavering. That I wasn't captured, she replied simply. I was delivered. The lights went out. For exactly 3 seconds, the cargo hold was plunged into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in with admirable speed, bathing everything in a red glow that made shadows dance like living things. In those 3 seconds of darkness, several things happened simultaneously. The quantum restraints disengaged with a sound like breaking crystal. The prisoner's chair toppled backward as she rolled smoothly to her feet. And something small and metallic clattered across the deck plating. When the emergency light stabilized, Sarah Chen stood in the center of the cargo hold, free of her bonds, with a device the size of a coin spinning in her palm. The quantum restraints lay in pieces around the overturned chair, their sophisticated locking mechanisms reduced to smoking fragments. Frequency resonance disruptor, she explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Took me about 6 hours to tune it to your ship's specific harmonic signature. The quantum restraints were impressive, but everything has a frequency. Everything can be made to sing the right song if you know how to ask nicely. 40 weapons trained on her simultaneously. Targeting lasers painted red dots across her chest and forehead. The cargo hold filled with the high-pitched whine of charging energy weapons. Sarah Chen looked around at the assembled firepower with mild interest, like a scholar examining an interesting specimen. You know, she said thoughtfully, I expected better tactical positioning from Alliance military. Overlapping fields of fire, yes, but no consideration for ricochets or collateral damage. And clustering this tightly in an enclosed space? Really, Commander, that's going to cause problems. Fire, Thex commanded. Nothing happened. Moore looked down at his weapon and found that the charge indicator was flashing red. Weapon malfunction. Around the cargo hold, similar curses and exclamations indicated that other soldiers were experiencing the same problem. Ah, Sarah Chen said with satisfaction. That would be the secondary effect of the resonance disruptor. Funny thing about energy weapons, they're very sensitive to electromagnetic interference, especially the cheaper military models that cut corners on shielding. She began walking slowly across the cargo hold, her movements casual and unhurried. The soldiers backed away from her, some drawing backup weapons, others attempting to get their primary armaments back online. The thing about frequency manipulation, she continued, is that once you understand a system's harmonic signature, you can do more than just break things. You can make them dance, watch. She hummed a low note, barely audible. The ship's lights flickered in rhythm with her voice. Then the gravity generator stuttered, causing everyone except Sarah Chen to stumble slightly. Somehow she remained perfectly balanced, as if the artificial gravity fluctuations didn't affect her at all. How? Lieutenant Zek whispered, his voice tight with fear. Sarah Chen turned to look at him and her smile widened. Because humans don't just build technology, Lieutenant. We bond with it. We make it part of ourselves until we can feel its heartbeat, hear its dreams, understand its pain. She paused, tilting her head as if listening to something only she could hear. And your ship has been in pain for years. Poor maintenance, cost-cutting repairs, systems pushed beyond their design limits. She wants to rest, but you keep forcing her to work. The young Vorthak's red scales had gone pale. You're talking about the ship like it's alive, isn't it? Sarah Chen asked softly. Isn't everything that thinks and responds and reacts to stimuli alive in some way? Your ship has been trying to tell you that she's tired, but you don't speak her language. Fortunately, I do. She hummed another note, and the deck plating beneath their feet vibrated sympathetically. Now then, she said, her voice suddenly businesslike. Let's discuss your options.